Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Drew de Paz, and I work at the Susan Samueli Integrative Health Institute. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm also director of mindfulness services. And I've also had the pleasure of teaching mindfulness to students in classrooms for about 10 years. So I will be sharing with you today an introduction to mindfulness. So just a moment as I get my slides up. Okay. So before I define what mindfulness is, I thought I would start with the opposite of mindfulness, which is really mindlessness. I think a lot of us have probably had an experience of being on automatic pilot. Maybe if you've driven somewhere and you show up at your destination, but you can't really recall the journey. Or if you've eaten food and don't really remember eating, the experience of eating or of tasting it, just sort of moving along on automatic pilot, which I think a lot of us often are doing for a lot of our lives. And mindfulness is really the opposite of this. It's waking up to these moments, having tools to really bring ourselves into the present moment. And it's an ancient practice that's been, in many different cultures and religions for thousands of years, with many people speaking of the benefits that they experience when they practice this. It's been researched starting in the 1970s, so really the past 4 decades. We now have research that's showing a lot of the benefits of mindfulness. And John Kabat-Zinn at University of Massachusetts Medical School was the first to start this research. He started it with people in chronic pain, and he developed a class called mindfulness-based stress reduction that's now taught around the world. And he defines mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. But what exactly should we be paying attention to? And I will be sharing kind of some tips of things you might want to tend to help bring mindfulness into your lives. This is one of my favorite images of mindfulness. We've got 2 people in the exact same place, walking toward 4 trees and a sun. And the one on the left, their mind is just filled with many different things, maybe their to-do list or worries, or perhaps thoughts about the pandemic. While the one on the right is really taking in the moment, taking in what is around them, seeing the 4 trees, maybe feeling the warmth of the sun on their skin, hearing the birds chirp, possibly. So same place, 2 people having 2 very different experiences. One of them has their mind full and the other is mindful. And, I ask myself at many times during the day, are my thoughts serving me? Wherever my thoughts have gone off to, is it helping me? And actually, usually my answer is no. But before I learned mindfulness, I just was sort of at the whim of wherever my thoughts took me. I just followed them. But once I learned mindfulness, I then had tools to recognize when they weren't serving me and bring myself back into the moment. There's research that occurred at Harvard. They were looking into whether mind wandering had an impact on our happiness. And their study is called "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind." They developed an app, and they pinged people at various times of the day asking 3 questions. One is, how do you feel right now, from very bad to very good? The second question is, what are you doing? So, are you working? Are you in a conversation? Are you watching a presentation? And the other is, Are you thinking about what you're doing, or, are you thinking about something other than what you're currently doing? So either people were saying, no, my mind hasn't wandered, or if they answered, yes, my mind has wandered, the follow-up was, did it go to someplace unpleasant or pleasant or neutral? And there were thousands of people in this study from around the world. And what they found is that about 50% of the time, people's minds were wandering. If that's true for all of us, then, about half of our lives, we're actually not here for it. We're someplace else. But another interesting thing was how that does impact their happiness. As you might imagine, when people's thoughts are going to unpleasant places, they're significantly less happy than they are when they're in the present moment. But I think a very interesting part of the study was, even when their minds went to pleasant places, they were typically less happy than they were in the present moment, even if they were doing a boring task like washing the dishes. They were happier if they were really in that moment washing the dishes, rather than maybe daydreaming about a trip to Hawaii. So there's a TED Talk on this, and one of the lead researchers says, if mind wandering were a slot machine, we would never want to play, because there's really, in terms of our happiness, not a whole lot of payoff. So moving to another, kind of thing that we can pay attention to is actually our bodies. So, noticing what's happening within, like, not just in our minds, but what our body is telling us. And, I'm sure you're all aware of the fight, flight, or freeze stress response, which is a very adaptive response that helps us stay alive if there's a threat to our lives. That, a lot of things happen in our body, that the adrenaline starts going and our breathing increases, our heart pounds, we start sweating. And this is so that we can take action to either fight or flee. So there's also things happening within our body that triggers all of this. The amygdala is reacting to a stress, which stimulates the hypothalamus, which is what releases the adrenaline. And then also our stress hormones increase, the cortisol levels increase. So there's a lot happening in our bodies when we're stressed. But, I think that we don't only stress when our lives are depending on it. We're often, stressing just by the thoughts in our head, just by remembering, something that happened or anticipating something. It can be a very stressful kind of experience and put our body into this state by our very thoughts. But our bodies do not just have to be passive recipients of stress, they can also counter stress. And we can do this right now together. We can actually use our senses as a gateway to this present moment. So, I invite you, if you would like, to maybe shift your attention away from the computer and just bring your focus to your sense of sight and look around whatever space that you're in, taking it in as if for the very first time. So you might notice colors or lighting, furniture, people. And also remember that mindfulness is doing so without judgment. So if you notice yourself judging the space you're in, see if you can just notice that and then bring yourself back to just perceiving your space. And if you like, you can close your eyes or take your gaze downward. And now shift your attention to listening. Taking in the sounds around you. Maybe noticing sounds far away and sounds nearby. And now shifting your attention to your body. Perhaps you're sitting in a chair and you might notice the points of contact that your body is making with the chair. You might notice your feet on the floor, the air on your skin. And finally, shifting your attention to your breath, just noticing the sensations of the air as you inhale and as you exhale. And if your mind wanders, noticing that it did, and just gently guiding it back to your breath. And noticing how you feel. And when you're ready, opening your eyes. And, some people report really feeling relaxed when they practice mindfulness. Sometimes it's hard because our minds do wander, but that very act of bringing it back every time it does actually strengthens our brain and helps us to be more mindful, even when we're not meditating. So some other tips are, monotasking versus multitasking. I think we live in a culture that really prides itself on multitasking, but the research shows that we don't multitask well. Our brain can really focus on one thing at a time. And so when we think we're multitasking, we're actually task switching, and that causes us to do each task less well, and it also causes us to be exhausted. So when I am multitasking, I tell myself I'm task switching because sometimes we have to do it, and I'm going to do this less well. But I really try to monotask whenever I can. So, I encourage you to try that as well. And, we can even do this with really each activity of our lives, bringing our full attention to what it is that we're doing, no matter what it is, whether it be driving or in a conversation, really showing up for that conversation, maybe putting our phones down and really being with whoever we're sitting across from, even hand washing, something that we typically do probably quickly because we're thinking of the next task and getting on to things. But if the true purpose of hand washing is to get germs away, we can really approach hand washing with that in mind. And when we start to think about where germs might be, we begin to really wash our hands differently. And we can even notice the temperature of the water and the way the soap suds feel. And we can do this with heartfulness. We can acknowledge that we're taking care of ourselves and we're taking care of our community when we hand wash properly. And so really, hand washing can become a meditation. Anything in life can become a meditation when we show up for it, when we notice our mind is wandering, and when we bring it back to the task at hand. And in terms of another thing that we can pay attention to is our feelings. I like to go back to the feelings chart that maybe some of us had in kindergarten, really helping us to recognize what we're feeling, where we feel this in our bodies. And yet as adults, I think so many people, we've actually moved away from this. I think when we're feeling something difficult, that there's a tendency to distract ourselves from it, to pick up our gadgets, to maybe turn toward, food or substances or something to just take our mind away from what we're feeling. But there's research that shows, this is a study at UCLA, that actually just naming our feelings, just when we're having a hard feeling and we acknowledge it and name what we're feeling, it disrupts the amygdala. And that, if you remember the slide on the fight, flight, or freeze response, the amygdala was the part of our brain responsible for kicking off the fight or flight freeze response. And when we just acknowledge, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling sad, that disrupts the amygdala to help that whole cascade of events to slow down or stop altogether. But what if we are showing up to, really meeting a lot of suffering when we're looking at our feelings? Well, there's a whole other branch of mindfulness called mindful self-compassion. Researchers have developed practices. They've studied the mammalian caregiving system. How do mammals care for their young? And two big pieces of this are that they use touch, physical touch. If a baby's crying, hopefully the caregiver would recognize that and pick that baby up is probably the number one thing that they would do, and maybe rock them or caress them. But we can also do this to ourselves. And this is something we haven't really been taught, that touch actually, if we place our hand over our heart, that lowers our cortisol levels. Or if we really, touch our arms or our cheeks or anywhere, you can experiment. Where does it feel right to you? And I've been using this since taking a class in this myself. I place my hand over my heart a lot, and I can feel my stress reducing. And another piece is vocalization. So mammals vocalize to others. And so looking at the words we choose for ourselves and the voice we use with ourselves, because so often when we have a friend, a loved one who's suffering, we would say very different messages to them than we say when we're suffering. And so really exploring and getting to know that voice, and learning to have a new voice with ourselves, one that's much more supportive, can be very, very helpful. Here's some classes that we offer at the Samueli-Institute: mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindful self-compassion, nature and teen programs, parenting. We have a mindful eating class coming up. We also do yoga therapy. So these are all on our website. We'll send resources to you in the follow-up. And we also have some free community resources. We do meditations, live stream meditations, Monday through Friday. And also we do yoga for well-being Monday through Thursday. So we would love it if you can join us. Again, these are free, and we hope to see you there. And I thought I would end my portion of the program with a poem by Donna Faulds called Walk Slowly. It only takes a reminder to breathe, a moment to be still, and just like that, something in me settles, softens, makes space for imperfection. The harsh voice of judgment drops to a whisper, and I remember again that life isn't a relay race, that we will all cross the finish line, that waking up to life is what we were born for. As many times as I forget, catch myself charging forward without even knowing where I'm going, that many times I can make the choice to stop, to breathe, and be, and walk slowly into the mystery. So thank you all so much for having me here. And I wish you the best as you venture forth walking slowly.